We discussed two of South Africa's largest sugar producers. On the one side, we have Illovo, which is Africa's biggest sugar producer, with a market cap of 17.5 billion rand. It has extensive agricultural and manufacturing operations in 6 African countries and is 51.5% owned by Associated British Foods. It has a price to earnings ratio of 22.3 and a dividend yield of 2.2%. On the other side, we have Tongaat Hewlett, which has 3 business divisions: sugar, starch and glucose, and property development. The company has a price to earnings ratio of 13.5, a dividend yield of 2%, and a market cap of 14 billion rand. Our guest, Chris Gilmore from Absa Investments, and Paul Theron, our resident expert from Vestact. So why the sugar story this evening?
Well, it's one of those things you kind of work your way down to, and sugar is where we've arrived. I mean, obviously well-established agricultural producers. Sugar, I must say, is obviously a key commodity item out there. It has risen in price over the last kind of 25 to 30 years as, consumption of sugar in countries around the world has risen. It's kind of fallen off a little bit recently. For a while there, it looked as though it was going to follow the oil price because the Brazilians use sugarcane to make ethanol to stock for cars. So there's a little bit of a kind of substitution thing happening on the global market. But currently, sugar looks a little bit patchy, and here in South Africa, at least, we've got 2 quality companies with big assets, so we can kind of get our teeth into them tonight.
Have you been following the sugar story for some time, Chris? Hopefully there's going to be value there at the end of this discussion.
I have, Bronwyn, and as Paul says, it's a volatile commodity. In fact, it's a notoriously volatile commodity. I've been in Brazil a couple of times and looked at the ethanol operations out there, and it has to be seen to be believed. It's quite incredible. I mean, cars can run on anything from 0 to 100% of ethanol and everything in between. And of course, they're the world's biggest producer. Here in South Africa, we're just on the fringe of what's called the sugarcane belt, which means that we're marginal producers at best. And the companies that have gone further north into other parts of Africa, like Zimbabwe and Zambia and Mozambique and Malawi, have done an awful lot better than the ones that have just stayed here.
Well, as you said, we're putting Tongaat Hewlett up against Illovo, and firstly we're going to look at their milling and distribution. Paul, you're going to take us through this part of the
both
businesses.
of these companies started out in KwaZulu-Natal in the 1800s. So basically, on the one hand, there was some guy called Hewlett who arrived off of a boat, landed in Durban, and decided after a few years to get into the sugarcane farming area because he figured, look, the climate looks good and all the rest of it. He was the guy who founded Kearsney College, that cute boys' school down there on the road.
We don't need that trivia, Paul. How many times have I got to get you away from the trivia on this show?
Over the years, it kind of evolved, and then they bought into Tongaat and they kind of merged those two. Then they got the aluminium business, but a couple of years ago, they booted all of that out, right? So that's where we get the company we've got now. Well established, big operations in this market, well-respected CEO, Peter Stoudy. So they've got these different business divisions and units, but locally here in South Africa, I think it's partially a sugarcane production story, partly a land holdings issue. We'll come to that later. As far as sugar's concerned, what can I say? I mean, they have good summers and then they have bad summers with the rain.
Well, this comes back to the agriculture story, and as Paul has rightly pointed out, you've got issues like flood and weather all impacting the business. Peter Stoudy, well respected. I concur with that view. Chris?
Oh, undoubtedly. I mean, Peter's been at the helm now for close on 10 years, I guess. And prior to that, there was the dead hand of Anglo-American, which had Tongaat as a kind of 44% associate or thereabouts. And it was a terribly parrot sort of company. It really was wasn't going to go anywhere. And Stoudy has really, I think, refreshed and energized the group. But I mean, if you look at other sugar companies, companies like Transvaal Suikerbeperk down in Mpumalanga, which is relying almost entirely on irrigation. It's only in recent years when they're getting water from dams in Swaziland that they've really started coming to the fore. So the weather side, as I say, because we're a marginal producer at best, unless you really have a huge commitment to irrigation in a big way, you're really not going to compete.
Bring Illovo into the picture now.
Excellent idea. C.G. Smith, one of South Africa's founding food industrialists, also in the 1800s.
And he didn't start a school somewhere, did he?
No, it's not as far as I know. But I mean, that name continued for many years, and it was only fairly recently that they took C.G. Smith Sugar, which was listed on our market, and put it together, I think, with Tate and Lyle's assets or something, and then they had the brand Illovo. Remember that campaign, Everybody Loves Illovo? and the picture of the lion with the bees coming out of him and all that.
And the green tin
Exactly.
with Lovo
So,
syrup.
I mean, all of that has kind of grown from those roots. But again, I mean, well-established, sizable estates, big production in the KwaZulu-Natal area. Whether or not this market, look, sugar's not going out of fashion anytime soon, and they use a lot of it in the associated food industries, in cereals, in everything that goes from fizzy drinks, Coca-Cola, sweets, all that sort of thing. So net, people's consumption of sugar is
It's not
probably
under
rising.
threat from substitutes at this point in time.
No, not really, because, you know, I mean, the sweeteners and all of that stuff is a very small part of the total industry.
Chris, let's get your thoughts on Ilovo before we track any further. And of course, we're still on the milling division.
Yeah, as Paul says, this is a really pure sugar play. And, you know, it's got extensive interest both here and in the rest of Africa. And it's also got extensive interest in the downstream products from sugar, things like furfural, for example. So it's done exceptionally well. Last year, you know, when we had a bit of a drought affecting the sugar producers, it really wasn't so good. It didn't look so good. That kind of broke what had hitherto been a very, very strong track record. So Ilovo has been a great performer for many years.
Who is edging ahead in this division?
One last point, this association with Associated British Foods is worth noting. So some years ago, they came in and offered and acquired a 50% plus one stake in the business. They've then participated and underwrote a rights issue. So they really are the dominant player here. The reason, of course, is that they want to take sugar from these production areas and import it into Europe. They get that most favored nation beneficial status and all of that. Associated British Foods has had its own problems, you know, globally.
Obviously, with the
It's been
European
reorganizing
Association as
everything.
well.
They had some assets in the US, I think, that they were also kind of busy knocking into shape.
Has it been hard hit by Europe?
Look, I don't know. Look, this business is all we're concerned about. And what you've seen here is the typical case where a foreign entity obtains a big stake is they want the dividends. They want to get their money back, and they operate it on, you know, tight lines in order to increase cash flows.
Can I ask the question again? In this division, we're talking about milling and distribution. Do we have Tongaat, Hewlett or Ilovo edging ahead, Chris?
Oh, I think Ilovo without a shadow of a doubt.
Paul Turan?
Yeah, as far as the sort of sugar only goes, we're going to talk about all the other stuff and Africa in a minute. So I would say yes, okay, let's go with Chris's current Ilovo in the lead.
Double thumbs up to Ilovo right